Business update with Stephen Carroll. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Jeannie.
Now, you're starting with the price of oil, which is on the rise.
Oil actually hit a 2-year high on the markets after the oil-producing cartel of OPEC and its allies said they expect demand to increase. The group of oil producers, led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, moved to gradually boost production in stages until July, partly reversing the dramatic cuts they made in the past year. On the markets, Brent crude and WTI have both rallied sharply. They're continuing to rise in trading today. Part of that reason is because despite those increases in production levels will still remain lower than they were before the pandemic. Peter O'Brien has more.
They're sticking to the plan. OPEC Plus, the 23-country group comprised of the oil producers cartel and its allies, will continue gradually increasing supply after they slowly began opening the taps in early May. It didn't take them long to decide. At the meeting, which lasted less than half an hour, the Saudi energy minister said demand had shown clear signs of improvement.
We want to give the market the assurance and the comfort that we will continue to be attentive and continuously monitoring the situation.
By next month, global output should be 2 million barrels a day greater than in April. During the pandemic last year, oil demand slowed and producer countries made drastic cuts to support prices. Now, prices have surged to the highest levels in years, and suppliers must judge how much additional oil the market needs. Recoveries from the pandemic are expected to drive demand higher, but that trend is uncertain as many countries are still battling the virus. Complicating estimates is the possible return to the market of more Iranian oil, which will depend on the outcome of talks over Iran's nuclear program.
Meanwhile, the White House has stopped planned drilling for oil in Alaska's Arctic Wildlife Refuge. Several licenses to explore for oil and gas were handed out in the final days of the Trump presidency. But the Biden administration has announced they're suspending those permits pending an environmental review. Indigenous groups had alleged the licenses violated federal law for failing to properly consider the impact on wildlife and native communities.
Now, Tesla has announced a recall of cars in the United States.
Around 6,000 vehicles affected. It's a relatively small number, covering Model 3 and Model Y cars that were produced between 2019 and 2021. They're being recalled because their brake caliper bolts could be loose, which might cause a loss of tyre pressure. The US Road Safety Authority says it's had no reports of crashes or injuries linked to the problem. Well, staying with companies news, the British publisher Bloomsbury has reported record annual profits as more people turn to reading books during the past year. The Harry Potter publisher saw sales rise by 14% in the year to the end of February. Profits rose by almost a third. Bloomsbury performed better than the industry as a whole, where sales grew by just 2% in the UK. Readers are still buying the Harry Potter books. Sales of the series were up by 7% in the past year. The company's CEO telling the Financial Times that the reading revival is not over, and the company has increased its profit forecast yet again for this year.
I know, I'm reading more. If only we could give my kids that message, Stephen. All right, the European Union now has agreed to new tax rules for big multinational companies.
Member states and European Parliament negotiators have reached a deal to boost tax transparency in the EU. This means that multinational companies with annual revenues of more than 750 million euros will have to declare how many employees they have, how much profit they make, and how much tax they pay in each EU member state. On top of that, they'll need to report details for countries that are on the EU's tax haven list. This country-by-country reporting rules will now need to be voted on by MEPs and by national leaders at the European Council. The plan has been criticised by Oxfam for not going far enough.
There's some good news in Australia, where the economy seems to be bouncing back.
Australia has joined the illustrious group of countries whose economies actually grew over the past year. Economic growth was faster than had been expected in the first 3 months of this year as consumers started spending some of their COVID savings and companies invested more. The Australian economy grew by 1.8% between January and March, down from the growth of 3.2% in the last 3 months of 2020. Compared to last year, Australia's economy is 1.1% bigger. It's one of only 6 countries in the world whose economies have grown over the past year. Australia escaped much of the economic slump due to relatively few cases of COVID-19 being reported there, but economists are warning that a slow rollout of vaccines may affect their future growth prospects.
Stephen, what's been happening on the markets today?
Stock markets are trading fairly flat in Europe this lunchtime. Small gains across London, Paris and Frankfurt. Shares in the low-cost airline Wizz Air are down 1.4% in London. That's after the company reported losses of €482 million for the past year. Of course, a very difficult time for airlines.
Stephen, just to wrap up now, Amazon has announced changes to its recruitment practices.
That's right, the e-commerce giant says it will stop testing job applicants for marijuana use. This after a man in New York sued the company in March, saying that Amazon had withdrawn its job offer at a warehouse after he tested positive. That's despite a ban on such tests in New York City. In a blog post, Amazon says it will still test workers for other drugs, but the company would now support the federal legalization of marijuana.
How about that? Stephen, I have a question for you you probably don't get every day. Do you know what whale vomit is used for?
Oh no, don't. This is something terrible.
Actually, no, it's not. It's the key component of perfume, and it's just made a bunch of poor fishermen very, very rich. You'll get the details coming up in the press review after the news. Stay with us.